Kids at our school, they were only allowed to go outside for 15 minutes. And that includes, going to the playground, leaving the playground. And that, we had a big school, that took probably 10 minutes. So technically they were only allowed, free independent play for 5 minutes. And I was continually getting in trouble, me, the teacher, I was getting in trouble for trying to get my kids outside for, longer amounts of time.
The model you're talking about, the government school model, is the new model. We don't think of it that way, but it's pretty recently created, like within the last 75 years. It's not something that's tried and tested. Yep. Really, it's tried and found wanting is what we're seeing right now.
Yeah,
I never just say, I'm just a stay-at-home mom. I say, no, I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I homeschool my children, and
what a
that's
blessing.
what I feel like I'm called to do.
This essay, The Weight of Glory, you will never meet a mortal soul. There's something he says in that essay, and that's crazy. That changes your whole perspective on everybody you meet in life. Everyone you meet will spend eternity somewhere. And your presence, you could impact the destination that person has. And if you're a parent, you are 100% impacting that.
Welcome to the Homefront Faith Podcast. My name is Matt. This is my wonderful wife, April.
I'm Chase.
And I'm his wife, Erin.
And we are, this is episode 2. We're back for episode 2. In this episode, I'm very excited about. We're going to be talking about just kind of our views on family and kids and school and just some different things I'm very interested in. So I guess we'll just kick off right off the bat. If you haven't watched episode 1 or listened to episode 1, go back to episode 1. We kind of introduce ourselves, talk a little about who we are, and as well as kind of what we do as far as church. We have a home church and things like that. But this episode, we're going to really focus in on our family and our kids and our kind of our mindset on raising kids. So we'll start off with how many kids does everyone have or want to have? So I'll let you guys go first.
Okay. We have one son right now, freshly out of the oven. Well,
Not that fresh.
He'll be 7 months old, Monday?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. We would like to have maybe 29 more. Is what we're shooting for.
Not quite. No, we don't have a set number particularly how many children we would like to have. Just however many God blesses us with. Mm-hmm. Just take one at a time and we'll see.
We need laborers.
You're one of those quiverful people.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it.
It's in the Bible.
Yeah.
It's in the Bible. So with us, we have 2 children. We have a 13-year-old son, so we hit that teenage stage of life, and then we have an 8-year-old daughter, 9-year-old. Lord,
9. Sure, 9.
That's what happens when your kids get old. You stop counting.
Or you go.
Or I get old, I guess. So we have a 9-year-old daughter, and you want to say anything about our kids? No. Just
we love our children. We love them.
We do love our children.
And their joy and privilege traits.
As far as how many kids we want, it's been a subject of debate in our family, but I think we're gonna right now, at least for the plan, we're done.
Right now,
unless God tells.
Unless
Matt
God
otherwise.
speaks.
Y'all heard that. He said right now.
Don't hold me to that. It's going to be on the internet forever now.
Just want to let you know I got a word from God.
He gonna have to calm down. Be like Gideon throwing out the fleece, doing stuff.
Right.
I need a little bit of confirmation on that. But I think right now we're good at 2. We did talk about having 3 at one point, but then we had some complications with our last child, and so just kind of put it on hold and decided we're good with 2, unless God changes something. April's good with 3. She
I said 3 or 4. But that's
15, 20. Why stop?
Why stop? Well, at some point, nature takes its course, and you got to stop.
That's true.
So awesome. So that's kind of we're all parents. It's gonna be an interesting perspective because you guys have a baby and we have a teenager, and so kind of a in between get two different perspectives from different stages. So since we've all had kids, what is everyone's thought? Okay, what were your views on raising kids prior to having kids, and has that changed at all since you had kids?
I would say as far as like a philosophy goes, our philosophy hasn't changed. I mean, it's pretty recent occurrence, our son being born. And me and Erin really aren't ones to jump into anything. So everything we do is pretty well researched, well thought out, well prayed about. So we really wanted to have the right mindset going into this. And that's just that our son, any kids we have are immortal souls. They're going to live forever. And we, as their parents, have a huge impact on how they go about doing that. Are they going to glorify God? Are they going to glorify themselves, worship themselves, or are they going to worship God? And as their parents, we have the biggest and the first impact on that. And also, we want to think about, like, they're not going to be kids forever. One day they're going to be adults with their own families. Our son is one day going to be a man, and he's going to be a husband, and he's going to be a father. And I want him to think about things the same way that I'm thinking about them, and be serious and be a good husband and a good father and lead his kids toward God like I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when you were speaking, that made me think, I feel like it's easy, like when they're little like this, to be overwhelmed and think, like, wow, if I had like 5 little kids, that would be so hard, which it would be hard. But you do have to think about them. Like, these are going to be like adults, Lord willing, serving Jesus one day. So that's a really good point. And I do think that's one thing that's changed since having kids is realizing what a blessing kids are. You know, the Bible, we were joking about it, but the Bible does say children are a blessing. And I feel like a major thing that has changed just since we started trying to have children is I was a teacher. If you watched the last episode, I talked a little bit about that. And I always planned on working, while we were raising our children. And I would say that's the biggest thing that's changed. I felt a very strong conviction to stay home and raise my children at home and to be the main caretaker. I always planned on working, but I distinctly remember the moment that that realization really came to me. I was sitting in the cafeteria at school with a lot of my friends at the table, and one of the teachers came up. He had just had a baby, and the baby wasn't very old at all, and he was talking about her going to daycare, and that's fine. I understand that people need to do that, and there's really good daycares out there, but in my mind, I could really just feel the Holy Spirit, convict me, and that's not what I wanted for my family, and I didn't feel that I could do that. So that's the main thing.
You also worked at a daycare as well before you were a teacher.
Yes, I did. And I might talk about that in a little bit. But that was really the moment that my eyes were opened. And I did wrestle with that decision up until literally we were at the hospital because I loved my job. I still do love my job. Some of my best friends work there. And I spent a lot of time and money, on my career on getting to where I was. So it was a hard decision, but I 100% believe that I made the right decision in staying home.
Yeah. Just to reiterate, I don't think many of the big picture things changed for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we wanted have the right mindset going into it. A lot of the little things maybe we weren't expecting might have changed, or maybe just became more so, obviously how much you love your kid. You can't even imagine it till you have a kid. But then other things like how much time it takes to raise a kid. You've got no idea. It's every minute of the day.
Yeah, you learn selflessness.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I've learned a lot is it's not about me anymore.
It's about me.
Which it never really was about me. So I feel like that's taught me a lot.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because once you have kids, you're you think you may be you're selfless. You think before you have kids, you try to love, care for others and put others above yourself. But when you have kids, that takes a whole different level of, of meaning. It should, it's supposed to. And so, April, I'll let you speak next before I say what changed in my view. But is there anything after having kids that shifted in your mindset of thinking about raising
You know,
kids.
why did I have kids with this man? Was that one of them?
She was blessed and highly favored. All right.
It's funny because like all growing up, like I just wanted to be like a mother. Like people be like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I never knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. And like I went to college because my dad was like, you have to go to college. But I didn't know, like I just took all my basic classes. I didn't know what I wanted to major in. And I ended up just getting my associate's degree in business management. I had no idea what I wanted to do or be. I thought business, I can do something with that. Then we got married really young. We got married when we were 21 and we had our first child at 23. And I've had jobs and mostly I've worked like second shift so I could be home and then we could switch. But like, I've always just wanted to be a mom. We'd play house when we were kids and I wanted 4 kids. And I just wanted to be a mom. And I used to think, like people would ask me when Luke was little, maybe even when Hope was little, I'd be like, oh, I'm just a mom. Like, I'm just a stay-at-home mom. But now my view has changed. I'm not just a stay-at-home mom. Like it's a high and holy calling. Like it's important. Like I'm raising my children and now I'm homeschooling them. That's an important job to raise 2 children and to steward them, to steward their souls and now to homeschool them. So now I never just say, I'm just a stay-at-home mom. I say, no, I'm a stay-at-home mom and I homeschool my children. And
What a
that's
blessing.
what I feel like I'm called to do. Like I don't, and some people are called to have careers, but I never felt like I was called to like we've been in ministry together as partners in ministry and stuff. And I felt called to do that. But yeah, like just being a mother, not just being a mother.
Just.
It's felt like, so I think my view has changed of it. Like at first, like not feeling like it was very important to now I feel like it is like one of the most important things on planet Earth that I could be doing is raising my children. And yeah. So that's what's changed. I guess that mindset has been a big change of like, oh, I just stay at home.
That'd be a good whole other episode.
That would be a really good episode. That's stay tuned. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you want to catch that episode later. Hit that notification bell. But I think for me the biggest shift, I've thought about this question a lot, kind of going back and forth in what I think, but for me the biggest shift I think was I viewed like the idea of having children. I knew that I had a responsibility to raise children to be, good people, good, citizens, good, just be well-rounded, good people and not, go off the wrong path. And I knew that going into having children, but probably the biggest shift for me, especially as my kids have gotten older and I've been able to have deeper conversations about God with them and different things, the mindset shift of I'm not just raising good citizens, I'm raising souls. Like they are, my children are not just, individual people, they're individual souls that I'm stewarding their spiritual life. And I think that is something that goes deeper than just, okay, I've got to make sure that they know how to treat other people nicely and they know how to interact socially and they know how to do all these things. But I have to go further. I have to make sure that they know God, and I have to make sure that not only they know God, that they see in me someone who knows God and can be a model for them. And so I think this mindset shift from their natural raising them naturally in their natural life to understanding that I'm also raising their spiritual life and raising, like I'm responsible to make sure that they know God in a, obviously it's a personal walk, and at a certain age, they get to the point where they have to make a choice, but I'm laying the foundation for that choice to be made well before that choice is ever made. And that shifted when I had kids, especially as my kids got a little bit out of baby stage and more into talking and learning. Then all of a sudden it made me realize this is a soul that God created, that he breathed his life into and put in my care not to get them to become good citizens. That's important, but to get them to become children of God. And that shifted for me after having children, that I think was a big deal.
It's that C.S. Lewis essay, The Weight of Glory. Like, you will never meet a mortal soul. It's something he says in that essay, and that's crazy. That changes your whole perspective on everybody you meet in life. Everyone you meet will spend eternity somewhere. and your presence, you could impact the destination that person has. And if you're a parent, you are 100% impacting that.
Yeah, and children imitate who they see and who they spend time with. And like when I was a teacher, and I would like hear the kids saying things that I would say. I mean, not that I said anything bad, but it just makes you think a lot more about what you're doing and what you're saying. Because when you hear it coming from a child, you're like, oh wow, maybe I shouldn't say that, or maybe I shouldn't react with that attitude. So having children makes you want to be a better person, or at least in my experience, it does.
That turns up like a million times more when it's your child repeating back things you said.
I'm sure.
It's crazy. And you're like, ooh, where'd you get that from? You've said it before. Oh my Lord.
Yes. Yes.
So I'd say that it's somewhat, I think it's almost impossible to have children and your mindset not shift some. It could be little things, could be big things, but it's definitely going to shift. And I think at every stage of childhood, it shifts, your initial thinking. And then as your child gets older, and now as we're entering into teenage stage, just my thought, me and April have been talking a lot about how so many young people fall away from the faith, or walk away from God as they get older. And we were talking about like one thing that we're going to be implementing as Luke gets out of middle school into high school is a apologetics defense thing that we're going to be teaching as part of his curriculum for school, for homeschool, because we want him. There's so many people who don't have a firm foundation, walk away from the faith. And that goes back to that. Now he's at that age where it's my mindset shifting even more towards I'm responsible for his soul. And that's just such an important.
I think it's the majority of kids leave the church once they become adults. And I think the majority of that portion that left end up coming back eventually. But that's a long period of unexplained, like, oh, why did you leave the church? And we've looked into some of those answers before, like it's theological problems and abuse stuff. But really, a lot of that could be solved with proper parenting, honestly.
Because sadly, teenagers spend, 30 minutes a day, if that, with their parents. So the parents aren't having the influence on the teenagers, the school or friends, or I don't know, not the parents. They're not the ones having the influence on the teenagers.
And that kind of leads us into our next, to get into the next topic here of, so, we homeschool. April mentioned that. I think you guys are planning on homeschooling, so we're going to talk about that in a moment. But first, before we get into school and talk about our children and raising children, a big part of that is schooling. What is your background? I know Erin mentioned earlier working at daycare and working as a teacher. What is everybody's background in the public school system? Did you go to public school? What's your thought on public school as far as just your background?
Well, I did attend public school all the years of my education. I worked at a daycare, like Chase was saying, probably about 3 years, and it started with 1-year-old and it went all the way up to pre-K. And we had Head Start and stuff too. And I primarily worked with the 1 and 2-year-olds. And that is a very challenging job. I learned a lot there, some good things, some not so good things. But it did give me a lot of insight in the way I wanted to raise my children. I guess that's how I could word it. I knew that I didn't want to send my children to a daycare just for various different reasons. I did enjoy my time there. It was a very challenging job, but I did learn a lot. And then I worked at an elementary school for 5 years. I taught first grade, and I love first grade. I really enjoy it. I was the lead first grade teacher, and I was also the lead English language arts teacher for the school. I really enjoy language arts and reading, and I really enjoyed having that position as well.
Yeah, I was publicly educated as well. I've never been a teacher or anything other than like teaching in a church. I've done a lot of that here recently, but I don't remember why or when exactly we started getting this urge. And it was probably me and Erin around the same time, probably independently. I started reading more on the school system or different types of education. There were some pretty big influential people that I kind of stumbled upon, started reading their books, and then they just kind of started this snowball effect of us looking into more and more other ways of educating our kids. Because when we were first married, we were completely okay and leaning towards the public school system because she taught there, and we were going to send our kids, like she was going to take them in the mornings and then go into work and all of that.
I guess what really opened my eyes really was just seeing how my students interacted with one another, seeing what they learned from each other. And there was, I could see their innocence leaving them almost, and it was scary. And like these children, they would sometimes know more than I knew. And no matter how much their parents, some of those children were trying to shield them from certain things, they went to school and they learned it anyways. And really, most of my students, they didn't know Jesus. They didn't even know why we really should celebrate Christmas. That's just one example. But the more years I taught, the more my eyes were opened, I think.
Yeah. So for us, I went to public school my entire school career, if that's the right word, school career. But I was in public school. I really, honestly, as a kid, my parents both had to work, and financially they just, in order for both of them to survive, or for all of us to survive, they had to work both. And as a result, I was in public school. And to be honest, the concept of private school or even homeschool wasn't even on my radar as a kid. Like I didn't even know it was an option or a thing. And so I just did public school my whole life. I have some thoughts on public school as a result of that I'll share later. But even our kids, when we first had kids, our intent was to put them in public school. Like we just assumed they would go to public school, and they did. Our son was in public school through what grade?
K through fifth. Well, fifth grade we took him out after 2 months.
Yeah, so he was pretty much all of elementary was in public school, and our daughter, it was just first grade,
kindergarten, and first grade we took her out after 2 months.
So she didn't have as much public school, but our son went all the way through elementary, and so that's kind of our background. April, you can tell your background on public school, what you did.
I went to public kindergarten, and then my parents thought it was horrible, but my parents were very, very strict and conservative. And I don't know if Maine is different, but I went to kindergarten.
She grew up north.
I went to kindergarten in Maine, and in kindergarten we had like the 2 mommies and 2 daddies books in the kindergarten. And my parents were like, absolutely not. We're going to pull her out, and we're going to do private school, but private Christian school is very expensive. So they had to make lots of sacrifices. Like my mom worked just so she could put us in private Christian school. And looking back, I wish she had homeschooled us, but she didn't think she was capable of homeschooling us. And I know she was capable of it, but she didn't think she was. So yeah, we went to private Christian school, me and my sister. We went to several different ones. We went to an Assemblies of God one, and then we went to a Baptist one. And then we went to a Vineyard one, and not saying anything bad about the Vineyard, but that was awful. It was horrible.
The Vineyard movement as a whole was good, but that school was not run
So I think private Christian school can be done right. It can be run well, but you have to be careful which one you pick, because some are just like in some church basement, and it's like not done well, not done to excellence. It's not
some
stewarded.
Some are no different than public school.
Yeah.
Some are not. You got some
Especially
bad
in high school, because a lot of the kids in high school, the one I went to, they were kicked out of public school, and their parents didn't know what to do with them. They had been kicked out of multiple public schools, so they were in Christian school, and they were like doing drugs.
Yeah, and the importance of that private school can be good, like private Christian school be good, but it's still not a replacement of the parenting. And like nothing's ever
They
going to
were like
replace
passing around Ritalin so they could snort it at the.
Wow.
That was my Christian.
It also wasn't very good, like educationally. Some students they let students fall behind. Like you had how many people in your graduating
The
class?
Assemblies of God school I went to, first through third, was very well run. They had like actually accredited. It was like actual like people who went to college to teach. And then the Baptist school I went to, 4th through 9th grade, it was done very well. They was done very well. But 10th through 12th, the Vineyard school that I went to, it was, I mean, they just had people that went to their church teaching, and they had like, didn't have college degrees. Not that you have to have a college degree to teach, but they just should not have been teaching anybody's children.
Yeah. How many students were in your
In my
class?
senior class, I forget how many kids we had now. only 5 graduated.
Yeah, I think you had 7 or 8.
Out
and
of
only 5
eight
graduated.
out of 8 students in the senior class, only 5 graduated, and one of them probably shouldn't have graduated, but they just liked him, and I think they just let him walk.
So I'm just saying, my point in pointing that out is private school. It can be good, but it needs to be done right, and it doesn't replace the parent. And there
are
important.
great private Christian schools even around here, but they're like $600 a month per student.
You can't just send your kids anywhere.
Yeah.
It's like kind of what we're saying.
That's the point.
Like you can just get on Netflix right now and look at all the documentaries of these, like even the troubled teen programs. Like there's 3 or 4 documentaries on Netflix. We watched one last night and it's crazy. Like people who are at the end of their rope with their kids acting up, don't know what to do, will just send them to people they don't even know. And then they get abused.
Oh, yeah.
Because,
those crazy camps where they like tie them up and send them out in the woods. Yes. Yeah. And they're abused. Like they have them like hauling water and they're not feeding them and stuff.
Oh, my goodness.
It's crazy.
But like you don't like it's the same thing with public schools, not the abuse part, but parents don't know what's going on there.
No.
You don't know what's going on in your school. Like it's no different than you sending them to some random stranger and they're walking through the desert.
Well, I think I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay.
I think the pandemic showed a lot of people like there's so much stuff that happens that a lot of parents or a lot of people didn't know, and then during the pandemic, a lot of that stuff got exposed because stuff was being done at home, and some of that stuff got exposed. There was a big push at the pandemic. So let's talk about public school because I want to make it clear before we answer this next question, where we understand that some people you don't have an option. You can't homeschool because of you're a single parent or even a 2-parent household, and you just whatever circumstance you can't homeschool or you can't afford private school. So we understand there are times when you have no choice to have your kid in public school. And we don't want to make anyone who's listening to this who has their kid in public school sound like, oh, if you have no other choice and you have your kids in public school, you're some kind of a bad parent. We're not saying that. It just means you need to be more intentional about what your kid's learning and making sure you're doing what you're doing at home. But we'll talk more about that. But I do want to talk about, because I think there's a reason we are all very much pro homeschool, pro even small private schools where you can have more, control over what the environment your student's in or your child's in. So tell me what was everybody's thoughts on the public school system and why you don't necessarily think it's the best option for children?
Yeah, well, first off, I want to kind of re-emphasize that we don't think that you're destroying your kid by sending them to public school.
Right.
Obviously, 3 out of 4 of us were public school educated, and your kid will probably be okay if you send them to public school. But my number one point is it's not optimal. I think the test scores prove you can get a better education from homeschool or private schooling than you can public school. Not sure if that's even really debated. I'm sure it is in some circles, but the numbers don't really seem to lie about that. Number 2 is when we say public school, what we're really meaning is government. It's a government school. The government has its hands in every detail just about of the school systems. They get to pick all kinds of different nitpicky little things that goes on and all kinds of different things. But that's not optimal. That's not good. What we want is a God-based education. And when you have a government education, it's required to be secular, which is without God. And that's a problem for me that believes God is the basis of all knowledge. God is the basis of all truth. All truth is God's truth. So that means math needs God. If there's no God, there's no math. So if you're going to teach my kid that 2 + 2 = 4 without saying because God made it that way, or that there needs to be a God for math to be consistent, then I've got a problem with that, because if there was no God, there's no reason for math to be consistent, kind of touching on the apologetic stuff. And that's one of the biggest issues for me is it requires us to start teaching kids, if you send your kids to a government school, that God isn't necessary for truth. God isn't necessary for science, for math, for even literature and all of these different laws and rules we have. We need uncreated God in order to sustain math and science and all of these things that we have. And if you're telling my kid that we don't need it, then that's a big issue. You're creating his education without a foundation. And that's really what a government education is. It's all these facts and knowledge about stuff with no foundation set based on anything.
Yes, that's the number one reason why we won't be spending or sending our children to public schools. I completely agree with that. And, as I started thinking about this podcast episode, I feel like my mind was just racing because, being a public school teacher, I learned so much. I enjoyed my time there. I learned a lot of positive things and not, a lot of negative things while I was a public school teacher. And I feel like there's so many topics I could speak on, but I tried to narrow it down so we wouldn't be here all day. But as a teacher, we were required every day during our 7 hours or so with the children. We had this long list of subjects and curriculum we had to teach. We did have to stick to the curriculum. And there was just never enough time in the day to do it all. And I felt like we were running this race, like literally, that's what I felt like, running a race, and like we could just never catch up. There was a pacing guide for each subject, and, you had to stick with that pacing guide. You had to teach things on time. And if the kids didn't get it, oh, well, we got to move on to the next thing 'cause the school year's almost over. So, most students, and I guess, schools are different, but most of our students would continually fall behind and continually receive failing scores on their standardized tests. And, we would sit in these meetings like with other teachers and the administrators, and they would basically say like, okay, what are you guys doing wrong? What are we doing wrong? What can we change? They would look at the teachers with the higher test scores and say, okay, what are you doing? So we can do it too. We can copy you. And they would look at the teachers with the low scores and say, okay, we're not doing what she's doing because that's not working. And I couldn't tell you how many meetings I sat in like that. But really what comes down to it is that model doesn't work. And it's obvious that it doesn't work. And I think a huge factor of that is, kids at our school, they were only allowed to go outside for 15 minutes. And that includes, going to the playground, leaving the playground. And that, we had a big school, that took probably 10 minutes. So technically they were only allowed, free independent play for 5 minutes, and that's huge. And like I was continually getting in trouble, me, the teacher, I was getting in trouble for trying to get my kids outside for, longer amounts of time. But obviously I really fought for trying to get our kids outside more, because, they weren't able to get out their energy. And, especially with little boys, girls are the same too. Little boys, they need to get that energy out. And if they don't, it results in behavior problems. They're not able to focus. They can't sit still. And really, if they could just go and run outside for 2 hours, then they would probably go back inside and be ready to work, Mm-hmm. So that was a huge thing that really bothered me. And I fought for more time outside. I wrote, countless grants. I won money for our school so we could have a garden outside. We raised chickens. We built an outdoor classroom with one of the grants that I was won. And still we were outside maybe for an hour, when the weather was warm. So that's just, that's one thing that I want more for my kids. And I know you guys feel the same.
Yeah. I think just one more point to kind of hammer down on or point out is the model you're talking about, the government school model, is the new model. We don't think of it that way, but I'm sure April's going to touch on this, but it's pretty recently created, like within the last 75 years. It's not something that's tried and tested. Yep. Really, it's tried and found wanting is what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I mean, the very first step, well, okay, maybe not for everyone. I don't want to speak for all schools in general. But, one of the first steps was, well, this child needs to be medicated. Send him to the doctor. He has ADHD. Get him some medication. And I won't go too
Meanwhile,
much
they've
into
got
that.
15 minutes of recess.
And then you have these poor little zombies that aren't even acting like themselves anymore. And it was really just heartbreaking to see that.
I think it's interesting because so Chase kind of laid the foundation of the biggest issue. Obviously, it's apart from God. Like you've removed God, and that was inevitable, and it was planned that way. And April kind of hit more on that in just a moment, but it was planned that way. It was designed. The government designed it specifically for that. But so Chase hit on the abandoning God. You kind of, Erin, hit more on the, just the practical side. Like they're not getting a good education, generally speaking, and not in all school. I mean, some kids are, excel, but for the most part, it's not designed to really cater to giving the best education for your child. And it doesn't foster an atmosphere where they actually can learn, because you don't have that time outside. You don't have that time to get that out. So then when they're sitting in class, it's a behavior issue, when it's really, if they just had some time to get some of that out, then they can sit and focus for a while,
Yeah.
So it's not designed for that. I think for me, one of my biggest issues, kind of to tack onto both of those things, is it's not designed for education. It's designed to teach children, or to tell children how to think, I guess. It's not the curriculum, intentionally so, is not designed to really help someone learn how to think, and how to process, and how to actually use your brain to problem solve and critically think, and deal with issues that may arise, that one day you won't have a teacher and you'll need to actually know how to think critically. And it's designed to get you to think like them, or how the government wants you to think, or how the government needs you to think to accomplish whatever purpose they have, which April will talk more into in a moment.
Just
Because
like memorizing information for a test, and you have to pass this test. You got to pass these standardized tests. And then a couple weeks later, they don't remember anything that was.
It's you're not mastering, like you said. They wouldn't be able to master something. They'd be moving on, because you got to get through the next thing. You're not learning. You're not actually mastering concepts. So you have no base foundation of how to, because you don't master it, so you don't really understand it. And when you don't know how to think through it, then you don't know how to actually process and critically evaluate and know how to think. So you grow up and you're not really equipped to handle life. So you just do whatever the government tells you, or whatever you've been programmed to think.
I did want to say that a lot of the critical thinking skills and the problem solving and the social skills and the independence is learned, at least with small children, that's learned through independent play, being outside in God's creation. And there's just no time for that in the public school. Just time for them to explore their interests by themselves. I read a lot of Charlotte Mason's books and things, and she says that kids need to be outside for 6 or more hours a day, and we're only giving kids 15 minutes. Like, that's a problem.
Yeah, and most people think that education is what we have to do to make a living or get a job, when in reality, education is teaching us how we should live. And I don't want a secular government teaching my kid how they should live.
I agree.
Yeah, so I wrote down, like, God gave me my children to raise. God gave our children to us to raise and to train and to steward, not the government. Like, God's desire and design, God's perfect model is, I believe, family and Christ-centered, and the mother being in the home. And what's better than the parents stewarding their children and having the most influence and impact on their children? Me being able to teach my children what I believe, my beliefs, my morals, teaching them the word of God. Like, they're not going to get that at public school. So I believe it's God's best ideal model. And also, we had always planned to, once Luke got into middle school, to homeschool him. But I thought, he's fine in elementary school. But I had gotten a hold of this book, None Dare Call Education. And if anybody is thinking about homeschooling, I would highly, highly suggest you to read this book.
I'll put a link, if you're on our YouTube channel, at Homefront Faith. Down in the description will be a link to the Amazon for that, and you can get that. It'll be a really good.
Yeah, I just happened upon this book at the thrift store, and I read it. And I read it like in a day, I think. And I started telling Matt everything about it. And it's all about like the foundations of the progressive movement creeping into the public school system. And all the way back in the 1930s, like I didn't realize that this started like all the way back in the 1930s. You think it's like a newer thing where like this socialist, progressive ideology has crept into the schools, but it started all the way back in 1934. John Dewey was the head of the Teachers College at Columbia University, and John Dewey was the nation's most influential educator in the first half of the 20th century. John Dewey was an atheist and a socialist. He co-authored the Anti-God Humanist Manifesto #1 in 1934. So he gets all like these disciples, these progressive thinkers, they're called the frontier thinkers, and their desire was to control most teacher training institutes, and they rewrote like all of the curriculum. So they go from like this McGuffey history, like American history that's based on morals and the Bible, it's Christ centered philosophy and principles. And these people, these progressive frontier thinkers, they start rewriting all the textbooks to like socialism textbooks, social studies, they start calling it in the 1930s. So Harold Rugg, he starts his new rewriting with socialism, his social studies, as they call it. They're not calling it history anymore, they're calling it social studies. And his whole books that he writes for social studies, and it's so Marxist and like so communist that later on down the road they realize, oh gosh, this is too Marxist, this is too socialist, like we have to stop with these books. And they like frantically start trying to push out like more American like good America books down the road. But by then a lot of the damage had already been done. And they said a bunch of these kids that had been raised on these social studies books, by the time the Korean War came, a lot of these kids that had grown up on this, they got captured as like POWs, and they were so easily converted to communism. Like 1/3 of them were so easily and so quickly, these prisoners of war, converted to communism. And some big like Chinese, I don't know, military guy said, these people don't know their history. They don't have any American loyalty. They must not teach that in America. They must not teach American history. They must not teach loyalty and stuff. So that just shows how downhill it went all the way back in the 1930s. And then people might say, well, see, it must have changed since then. But no, you have back in 1989, you have Dr. Shirley McCune, key education bureaucrat. She says that their new goal is a total restructuring of society. We no longer see, this is a quote from Dr. Shirley McCune, 1989. We no longer see the teaching of facts and information as the primary function of education. Building a new kind of people must be part of education. And then you have Lamar Alexander. He was the president of the University of Tennessee. He's a former governor of Tennessee. And he says we have to get the kids 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., starting from 3 months to 18 years. So then they start doing like government grants, government money to get after school care, before and after school care, plus get daycare. They're paying mothers to go to work with government money so they can get kids from 3 months to 18 years. And then that Lamar Alexander, he becomes the U.S. Secretary of Education. And he says, along with Shirley McCune, that they want schools to be the community centers for meeting all human needs, the cog and center for all human resource development.
So basically, it's the goals of the schools shifted from actually educating and actually teaching and actually developing people. It shifted to developing things for the government, like basically
away from American values.
Yeah.
And they wanted to get to, I mean, these people
Workers.
are socialists, they're anti-God, they're atheists, and they're rewriting the curriculum. And then they're saying like, we want nothing to do with God in any of the curriculum, like no mention of God. And then even really quickly in 1992, there's all these new school reforms under Hillary Clinton and this guy named Mark Tucker and Rockefeller. And they made this new 50-page plan to create a new culture through the public school system. And they are quoted as saying in this 50-page document, behavior modification is a significant part of restructuring our schools. School children will be trained to be politically correct, to be unbiased, to understand diversity, to accept alternate lifestyles, to contribute to our new community. So basically, they're trying to make a new world, and they're doing that through the children, through the government schools. They're going to make them believe in these ideas that we as Christians, we don't believe in these alternative lifestyles, and they're going to teach that as fact. And if you don't believe that, then
And
you're wrong, basically.
that's really the main issue that I have. We like Chase said, if you have your kids in public school, it doesn't mean your kid's going to be absolutely, brainwashed or have issues or not be well adjusted. But the only way they are going to be is if you as a parent are involved. Like you can't have your kids in public school and just assume that the public school is going to raise them up right. You have to say, okay, if my kid has to be in public school and I don't have options to homeschool or don't have options to do these other things, then I need to make sure that in the evenings, sit around the family table. Let's talk. We're around the table. What'd you learn in school today? Let's talk about what you learned. Let's talk about everything you're going through. Let me be involved as much as I can in my child's life and knowing what they're learning, and make sure that I'm teaching them the right thing at home, even if I can't be at home during the day homeschooling. And so I think public school is not the problem with public school is that it was not designed for what the Christian purpose is. It's not designed to raise people with Christian values and to teach them the foundation of all things. It's not designed to. It's brainwashing. It's training you to be in the image. It's training kids to be in the image of what the government wants them to be. And if you're not combating that as a parent and your kid's in public school, there's going to be problems down the line. And if you can pull them out, do it. You know what I'm saying? It's just not because, and this, I want to point out also, and Erin, you can say something on this and then we can wrap up, but I want to make sure I'm clear that this is not individual teachers. Now, there are some bad individual teachers that shouldn't be teachers, but setting that aside, just saying. But this is not individual. There can be great, amazing, even godly teachers, but they're still stuck inside a system that isn't designed. The issue is the system, if that makes sense. It's not the individual teachers. I want to make sure if you're a teacher, we're not saying you're bad. That's not the point. The point is that the system of the public school, we need godly teachers in the public school. We do, because there's people who have to go there because they have no other option. And if they're there, we need godly teachers who can be there.
You're the only ones holding it together.
Yeah. So we thank you for that. But I do want to point out that the system is what we're addressing. It's a bad system.
Yeah. Well, it comes down to it. Like you said, there's lots of godly teachers. I know a lot of them. But like I found myself, I felt like I was constantly in a fight. Like I could teach all day long. I could teach gentleness, kindness, self-control. I could try to teach them all those things, but if that's not what their parents are teaching them at home, it's like we're working against each other, and really it's exhausting. And like you were talking about the bad teachers, I'm sure they started out as great teachers, but teaching is very hard. And it can be very exhausting. And if you're not in a good school, then you don't have any support. And then, well, that makes you not want to try your hardest. But I do cherish the time that I spent there because I learned so much. I have so many good friends. There's so many mentors. And I really do believe that that has prepared me to teach my children. So,
yeah,
yes.
Definitely.
Mhm.
So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to wrap up this episode, but you want to make sure that if you're listening to this on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, make sure you follow and subscribe to the feed. And if you're watching us on YouTube, youtube.com/@homefaith. Nope, that was wrong. youtube.com/the@ home front faith. We'll get it right. And, but you want to subscribe, click that notification bell. Our next episode, we're going to talk more about homeschool and just like what our views are like homeschool are. Why do we enjoy homeschool? Why we think that's an optimal model, and what we do for our homeschool,
What
and
a typical homeschool day looks like for
and
us. Like,
and the importance of that in the context of sheltering our kids from certain things in culture and things like that. So we'll talk more about that in the next episode. So click that subscribe button and we'll see you next time.